girls would go on dates, and then they would come home, and we'd all gather together, and they'd tell us about the date.
Did they have some crazy stories?
What?
Did they have crazy stories?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, but that was a family get together. They come home from dates and the family would gather, there's 7 of us, and they would tell them about their dates.
How did your parents react?
Well, they were listening too. My mother would love to listen and hear it.
What about your father?
Yeah, he would too, but he was busy with his businesses. My father only could read English up till the 2nd and 3rd grade. So he had to rely on my mother. Well, that didn't make for a good relationship because he liked to be in charge.
Mm-hmm.
But he had to depend on her to read stuff and to do the various business transactions. He owned about 7 or 8 tenement houses. He and the bank owned 7 or 8 houses, and there's business associated with that. But he had to depend on my mother because she could read on a higher level. She went to 10th grade.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go get a couple things. I'll be back.
Okay.
My sister Selma, the oldest, she only went to 1 semester of college, but she got a job with the government during the war. And she rose through the ranks and became pretty important, did pretty well. She was very smart, very bright, but she didn't go to college. My sister Helen, she went to college for 4 years, and she became a shorthand and typing teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And she helped me with algebra. I never would have passed algebra without my sister Helen. And she helped me learn how to write a composition, because I could not write a composition. And she helped me enough that soon I was writing pretty good compositions. But without her, I never would have passed algebra or ever learned how to write compositions. We didn't have much reading material in the house. My father had the Jewish paper, the Forwards, the Forward, that's the name of it. So we had to start buying our own English paper, so we kept up with what was happening in the world. My mother read the English paper, not the Jewish paper.
Did you feel like you were very Jewish while growing up?
Well, Jewish was sort of emphasized. My father and mother talked Jewish to each other. And my grandma Esther and Morris, they came from Russia and Poland, and they spoke Jewish. More Jewish than English. And they were the family, my Esther and Morris, but they lived with my Aunt Jean, who was a spinster. She didn't get married until she was about 40.
Wow.
And she met Uncle Lou, who was a dentist, and they got married. And at 40, she had 2 children.
Wow.
My cousin Arthur and Harold. Arnold became a psychologist. Very bright. And he went to some good schools. And Arthur became a dentist, like his father. They were the educated family. My father's family was not educated, but my mother's was. And they stressed education. My sister Jen my Aunt Jen was a teacher. And she stressed education to us. And at that time, in the Depression, teachers worked regularly and they earned a salary, and they did well. They did better than most of the population.
Really?
So she traveled all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
She was a spinster. She wasn't married. But then at the age of 40, she met Uncle Lou, who was a dentist,
Mm-hmm.
who was also single, and they got married. And they had 2 children at advanced stages. And Harold became a psychologist, went to good schools, and Arthur became a dentist, like his father. So that was a late marriage,
Mm-hmm.
but worked out well, and the children achieved. And my Aunt Jen was a spinster, single woman who didn't marry till she was about 40-ish.
Right.
And then she had not only got married, she had 2 children, quite an advanced age.
So what about your grandparents then? What memories do you have with your grandparents?
Now, Jen, because she was a spinster, not married, she lived with my grandparents, who were, Morris was a tailor, and he worked in some factories in Manhattan as a tailor. Operated a sewing machine and stuff.
Was that your mother's father?
My mother's father, Morris. Esther didn't work. Someone at the door?
Where'd you go?
This is not the trail.
What you
Yes,
did?
yes, please. You got a parent course out there.
Esther didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
She was a sweet old woman. She was short and small, but sweet. And she would come to visit us, which means she had to travel the subway. And here's this short woman traveling on the subway. And then it became the elevator. And she would come visit us, carrying 2 shopping bags, 2 perklach. And she would have various foods, and at the bottom of it she had 2 purses. She'd open one purse, and then she'd open the other purse, and she'd dig out $2 and give it to me.
That was a lot of money back then. $2.
Yeah, well, and she was the only one who gave me money. Funny story. Kurt lived with us, with Bobbie and I used to give him money. And Mark would say to him, "Where'd you get the money?" Honey gave it to me. I made sure he had money. And I got him a car and stuff like that. He drove my Corvette.
You had a Corvette?
a Corvette.
Coven adventure.
I bought a sports car.
You like your sports cars,
When I
huh?
worked out, yeah. After the Corvette, I bought Jaguars. But when I was growing up and stuff, my brother and I chipped in to buy a car. So we both owned this one car. And he would get it for a week, and then I would have it for a week. And that's how we managed to have a car. It was a 1943, I think, Chevrolet, blue and white,
Mm-hmm.
multi-color. It's a nice looking car. And I think I had it painted orange and white, which was a mistake. That was my first car of my own, but I used to drive my father's cars. He had two. He had a sedan, but then he had a plumbing truck. Now this truck had an open back because he used to carry pipes and stuff like that. It was a plumber. And I would use that truck, small little truck, for dates. And we even had double dates, where there were only 3 seats in this little panel truck. So it would be me, my girl, friend, whoever, with me, a buddy with a girl on his lap. And that's how we drove around, which was illegal, of course. We'd double date to Far Rockaway, where they had the amusement park. That's where the big dates were. Or Coney Island, which also had the amusement park. It had the steeplechase. So when I was in 8th grade, the big thing for the 8th grade graduating class was to go to Coney Island and the steeplechase, which had 21 rides for 99 cents.
That's a lot of rides.
Wasn't bad. And you usually took a girl with you. And I took Barbara Palmer. Now Barbara Palmer had a dark complexion. And she had sort of kinky hair. In retrospect, she was a mixed gal who was mixed black and white. I didn't know it at the time or realize it at the time. But in retrospect, she had kinky hair and she was a mix. And she and I went on the 8th grade graduation party together.
Mm-hmm.
And we were girlfriend and boyfriend, and we necked with each other. Barbara, I was quite crazy about her. And I imagine she was crazy about me. I imagine.
So is the story true about how we got our last name? With it being too long to fit on the truck?
Koviensky, that was my father's name. Koviensky, which would have been spelled C-O-V-E-N-Y-E-N-S-K-Y. Now, the story was that he had a small panel truck. And from Koviensky, he was partners with his brother, David. Now David was older and had more education than my father. He went to school more. He could read and write more. My father's reading and writing was very limited, third grade level. But he read the forward, the Jewish people, which he could read. So he was literate, but not in English, except to a second or third grade level, which hurt him. He had to depend on my mother, which caused a lot of fights between them, because he didn't trust her.
But so the truck panel.
Yeah, Chuck. So I think he might have changed his name sooner, but the story is that Kofiansky wouldn't fit on a small panel truck, so he had to cut it and make it Coven. But I imagine that had something to do with becoming more Americanized, and that most probably was more of the reason. So we got the name Coven, which he didn't know, and my mother didn't know. That's a gathering of warlocks and witches. A coven.
It's a good last name.
I don't think I realized it had a meaning like that until I was older. A coven. It's a good name, Coven. Short. But originally was Koviansky, a very Jewish. My father was from Russia, Poland. And you can imagine that the whole Jewish population in Russia migrated to the United States. Quite a few. A large portion, because Russia was poor and Russia had pogroms. You know what a pogrom is? You boys know what a pogrom is?
No, what's that?
That is when they wipe out Jewish people. And in Russia, in the 1800s and before, they would wipe out Jewish people. Every so often, they would wipe out the Jewish population. And that was called a pogrom. Quite serious. So the Jewish people migrated from Russia to that new country, which was supposed to have opportunity and freedom and no pogroms, where they would suddenly round up the Jews and kill them. That happened constantly, every so often. There's a lot of anti-Semitism.